Ryan McBeth is a U.S. Army veteran and OSINT analyst. Welcome to our program, Ryan.
Thank you so much. It's always great to appear on here.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump will not abandon Ukraine. He will even arm Ukraine to the teeth, according to Financial Times and Bloomberg. Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Advisor, Trump's advisor Mike Waltz, says that he can lift restrictions on long-range weapons to force Vladimir Putin to negotiate. Don't you think that Vladimir Putin now is in a worse situation with Donald Trump in the White House?
You know, people think that politics is the art of doing one thing and saying you're going to do, saying one thing and doing something else. But really, it's with President Trump, it seems to be doing one thing, saying something else, and then actually intending to do something entirely different. So, you know, I kind of called that one, that President Trump wasn't going to abandon Ukraine, mainly because he knows that, number one, it is the right thing to do. It is the right thing to support a budding democracy that only wants peace. So that's kind of number one. Number two, this man isn't used to playing second fiddle to anybody. He is the person who wants to be known on the world stage as the world's leader. And if it comes down between him and Putin as the leader of the world, he wants it to be him. And third thing is that, and as much as I hate to say this to Ukrainians, the war in Ukraine is more about deterring China than it is about deterring Russia. Because if we don't support Ukraine now, then it's going to be a lot more difficult to support Taiwan if deterrence fails and China invades. Because if we can't support a country that has a rail line connecting to Poland, we're not going to be able to support a country that's 6,100 miles away, not 10,000 kilometers away from everything but China. I don't like to say that all that much because I think it implies that Ukraine is being used as a pawn in a more global game. But I like options one and options two as well. It's that it is the right thing to do. I think President Trump knows that, and he has definitely been the wild card in our foreign policy.
Also, according to Financial Times publication, Donald Trump's team understands that the defeat of Ukraine would be a disaster for Donald Trump and will force Donald Trump to look weak on the international stage. Do you think that now Donald Trump's team has already understood that it's really critical to support Ukraine not only for the U.S. national interest, but also for Donald Trump's interests?
But you could say that. I think that there's a lot of people who voted for President Trump who don't care about Ukraine one way or the other. And a lot of that kind of goes back to President Biden and so his two biggest mistakes. The first mistake being that he never had a television address where he addressed the nation and said, this is why it's important to support Ukraine. It's budding democracy. We need to stop Russian aggression. We need to let China know our resolve. He never did that. And the second thing that President Biden never did was he only gave Ukraine enough weapons to lose slowly, but not enough to win and finish the fight. And why he did that, I don't know. I think it was the old Cold Warrior in him who still thinks Russia is this big bad bear with nuclear weapons that actually work. But I think that this was kind of a predetermined conclusion. But for the most part, I don't believe that people who supported Trump care about Ukraine one way or the other, because some of them bought into the Russian propaganda. And some of them thought that, hey, if President Biden is doing something, we have to be against it. And there is an old saying that our politics stop at the water's edge. And the United States should be a united front when it comes to our foreign policy. And we should all be in agreement as to the next steps forward, especially when it comes to something like deterring Russia.
Also, there is an interesting publication from Bloomberg. So European allies are confident that the Trump administration can help Ukraine return to a position of strength before any talks can take place with Russia. According to the Bloomberg sources in Europe, What can Donald Trump's administration do to help Ukraine to improve its position before negotiations with Russia?
Well, there's a number of things they can do. The first is that probably the most effective thing the administration can do is allow flying tigers. And that would be a group of foreign nationals, maybe some from the United States, retired F-16 pilots, retired F-16 maintainers, who can travel to Ukraine, who can fly as part of the Ukrainian military, not as part of the American military, as part of the Ukrainian military. They fly the F-16, they know the F-16 systems, and they can provide that bridge between the few pilots that Ukraine has now and the pilot training programs that they are getting their pilots into to go fly the F-16. So that's kind of number one. Second is we got plenty of F-16s in the boneyard sitting in Nevada. Let's get those F-16s over to Ukraine. You're going to have to buy them or lease them, but let's get them over there and start doing good. Get them out of the boneyard, get them over, get their systems updated, get them over to Ukraine, because everything starts with the F-16. Another thing they could do that would be very important is to just take off any kind of restrictions for attacking inside Russia. You know, Ukraine has been trying to fight this war with one hand tied behind its back. And that's very difficult to do when the Russians know that they can stage weapons and equipment in a certain place and they can't be touched. You need to be able to reach out and touch them. So that's kind of number two. Third thing is to give Ukraine as much artillery ammunition as they can possibly handle. Just fill the trains coming from Poland with shells. Now, if you do that, you're going to see something very special. Ukraine has done an amazing job with their FPV drones, their first-person view drones. But the reason they started doing that is because the world failed them. It's because the world did not give them enough artillery shells. When you use an FPV drone, a first-person view drone with a small explosive to kill Russians in onesies and twosies, that is a way to attrit Russians, but you need to kill them by the bushel. And you can only do that with artillery. And bushel is if you look at a barrel of apples, that's an American expression. That's a bushel, like a little barrel of apples. So there's that. And that will help Ukraine significantly because now you're not using one soldier and one FPV drone to kill one Russian. You're using, a Ukrainian soldier with his drone to target Russians by the tens, by the hundreds even. And that's how you win a war, when you attrit the adversary so badly that they can't physically continue. And you can do that with Ukraine's drone technology that they've built up over the past, it's almost been 3 years. 3 years. Ukraine's drone technology they built up over the past 3 years, combined with American and European artillery shells.
Moreover, you just mentioned about Ukrainian drones. President Zelensky says that Ukraine should produce 1 million drones per year. What would it mean for the Russian side?
With 1 million drones per year, I mean, it's one of those things where Ukraine is you always have to look at your balance between, all right, I can make this. If I make this thing, I probably can't put money and industrial production into this other thing. So kind of the question is, if I make these first-person view drones, am I neglecting the ability to manufacture artillery rounds? So maybe the drone thing, it's one thing that has worked well for Ukraine, and maybe they are betting that they will get the artillery from someplace else, because it doesn't seem like anybody on the planet other than China, maybe Iran, can make these small, cheap drones at a rate that Ukraine is making them. That is a capability that right now only Ukraine has. And it's a capability that was kind of forced upon them, right? So these million drones that some might be FPV drones, some might be long-range drones. We don't know the actual breakdown of each drone type, but I can tell you that it's going to be a lot of trouble for Russia when they're essentially facing, oh my goodness, about 80,000 drones coming at them every month. You know, if you equate one FPV drone for every Russian soldier, you can easily see how that can attrit a heck of a lot of Russian soldiers.
And also North Korean one. We have heard about new casualties. More than 3,000 North Korean troops, North Korean soldiers have already been killed or wounded in the fight against Ukraine. They are literally used as a cannon fodder. What is your take on that? And how can you assess their performance on the battlefield? It seems like this is a poor disaster of the North Korean army.
So that depends on how you define disaster. The North Korean troops may be used exactly as designed. What we're looking at right now is a country that doesn't have a lot to trade with, but they do have men. And some of those men, based on diary captures, some of those men might be dissidents or people who had done something wrong. And doing something wrong might be as simple as there was dust on your picture of the ruling party of North Korea, and that dust was found during an inspection of your home, and now you're an enemy of the state, and so you choose to volunteer to go to Russia and fight to regain the honor of your family. So there's stuff like that that we can't even comprehend, that we can't even understand. And when you take a look at North Korea's resource men, you also have to look at Russia's resource, which is not necessarily men any longer. Because for the longest time, Russia, the government of Russia, kind of had this deal with the elites in St. Petersburg and Moscow. And the deal was the people said, listen, you can fight whatever war you want, I don't care, but don't touch our kids. And the first general mobilization that happened in the summer of 2022, I believe, that first general mobilization, that touched the kids of the elite. And that made the elite mad. So now Russia needs to reach deep into its pockets among the poorer areas of Russia, the rural areas of Russia. They need to grab those people and not grab, but incentivize them to join through money, right? Right now, Russia's economy, I think they're at like 2% some unemployment, like this crazy low number. And so you have factories competing with the army for men. So the factories ask for money, or the factories need workers, so they pay a wage. And then the army realizes they have to compete with the factories, so the army increases their wages or bonuses. So then the factories increase their bonuses, and the army increases their bonuses. And there is a ceiling to that, right? You can only increase your salary so much. Inflation is rampant in Russia. I think it's running at about 20%. But if you get your troops from North Korea, you don't have to deal with any of that. And as a bonus, North Korea gets to get rid of their dissidents. So I don't know how well they're fighting, but North Korean dissidents dying inside of Ukraine might be part of the plan, just kind of in general, where they don't necessarily have to fight well, they just have to fight good enough for them to shore up Russian lines, and Kim gets to remove himself of any dissidents who could cause trouble inside North Korea.
I would like to get back to our topic about negotiations. Do you believe in a fast and speed deal between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin? Trump says that he will meet Vladimir Putin shortly after the inauguration. Kremlin has not yet commented on this issue, but do you believe in a speedy deal between Trump and Vladimir Putin about a ceasefire in Ukraine?
I believe it might be possible. However, there's a couple of constraints. The first is that President Putin might have trouble leaving Russia. It's kind of number one, right? When you are an authoritarian dictator, anytime you leave the country, you are leaving yourself open to some sort of coup. So that's kind of an issue right there. Number one, President Putin might have difficulty leaving. he has left the country before, but he's only gone to countries that are fairly close to Russia. So that's number one. The second problem is that is President Trump going to go to Russia? That might be a tough sell, right? Flying a president into a country that's actively at war with another country. We did it in Iraq with President Bush. I think President Obama visited Iraq as well. But the air defense systems inside Iraq were a lot different than the air defense systems inside Russia. And they could have an upsie, right? They go, oops, oh, sorry, we let this missile go at Air Force One. My bad, right? So that would mean that President Trump would probably need to meet Vladimir Putin on neutral ground.
Like Switzerland,
and that
for example.
could mean, I'm sorry?
Like Switzerland.
Like Switzerland, or perhaps Saudi Arabia, UAE, maybe Turkey. That might be a possibility. So that could maybe happen. Now, I don't know if Turkey has an arrest warrant out for President Putin, but they would have to find a country that doesn't have an arrest warrant out for the guy, along with a country that's willing to host them. And that might be a tough sell to any nation. So President Trump might want to meet President Putin, but logistically it might be difficult to do. And President Putin might not necessarily want to leave Russia for these purposes, because every time he leaves, it's a risk.
Is he risking his life every time when he leaves Russia?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so.
And you're confident that he will not be happy about risking his life for a deal with Donald Trump?
Well, so the only thing that can happen if President Putin meets with President Trump is that President Putin doesn't get what he wants. So why even meet with the guy, right? Because you're only going to make President Trump look good. You're not going to look good. You're going to look weak. And I've said it before that President Putin literally cannot stop this war, because the Russian economy it's off the rails right now, and it is overheating. And so if he stopped the war tomorrow and recalled soldiers, let's say they froze Ukrainian lines completely, they froze the lines in Ukraine, you would leave some soldiers in place, but a lot of soldiers would be demobilized. Well, now you have soldiers going home. They know how to use a gun. They don't have a job. They can't get a job. And suddenly all these people in weapons factories, they're out of a job as well. What is that a recipe for? Now, I know gun laws in Russia aren't the same as the United States, but I'll tell you this. If you're a former soldier and you know how to use a weapon, and maybe you did some shady stuff when you were a soldier, you can find weapons. It's not that hard. And now you have this perfect storm of men who have fought, they know how to kill, and they know how to use weapons. That's how you end up hung upside down outside of a gas station like Mussolini. Or you get the Ceausescu special. So President Putin literally can't stop this war, because if he does, there is a significant risk that he might be removed from power.
But do you believe that Trump is capable of persuading Vladimir Putin or forcing him to stop this war with aiding Ukraine, with sending military equipment to Ukraine, allowing to strike inside Russia, and another portion of sanctions against Russian economy? Because on the other hand, there are lots of discussions that Russia cannot sustain such a high regime of sanctions for a long haul, for a long time, because Russia's economy has started to struggle, has started struggling because the interest rates are more than 20%. The GDP growth is slowed down by Western sanctions. There is a high rate of inflation in Russia. So do you believe that Trump can persuade Vladimir Putin to stop this war, even if he faces a physical threat to his life, even if Vladimir Putin will face a physical threat to his life?
I don't think so. And I say that because there's too many disadvantages to stopping the war. What I can see is President Trump convincing President Putin to continue the war. And that's when he starts losing ground. And I'm glad you mentioned the economy and sanctions, because one of the big problems with Russia right now is rail cars. A lot of the rail cars are made in the West. And a lot of this comes back to machine tools. Machine tools are the computer numeric control manufacturing systems that build parts. And you have a finite number of these machine tools. Russia doesn't really have a machine tool industry. China doesn't really have one either. So they get a lot of these machine tools from Europe. Now it's been about 3 years, and they've been using these machine tools essentially nonstop for 3 years to make parts. Well, now you have a choice. You can use these machine tools to make parts for the oil rigs that are driving your economy. You can use these machine tools to make weapons, or you can use these machine tools to make the bogies, which are the wheels that are underneath the rail cars, because those things are breaking down. So if you don't make parts for the oil rigs, you can't pay your army. You can't sell the oil to China and India and pay your army. If you don't make the weapon systems, your army has nothing to fight with. And if you don't make the bogies for underneath the rail cars, then you have no way of transporting your weapons, and that's an issue, right? So I could easily see a point where the sanctions work in the sense that Russia, they'll never be out of ways to make weapons, make oil rig parts, or make parts for rail cars, but there'll be less of them. And that will slowly build up to the point where we see Russia attacking with 1 or 2 tanks instead of 10, right? Because there's just fewer ways to logistically supply them. And I think that's when you're going to see the tide turn for Ukraine. And it will be a slow advance on Ukraine's side as different parts of Russian lines collapse. So can President Trump convince Putin to stop the war? No. But I believe that he can get the right weapons to Ukraine so that maybe not this year, but by next year, Russia is on the back foot to the point where they can't push weapons out to the front fast enough, and you start to see Ukraine gain ground. So this might be a stop the war in 2026, 2027 kind of thing, where Russia has to stop the war in 2 years because there's essentially no way of feeding all their troops, getting all their troops equipment. And by that point, you're going to run that risk of getting thrown out of office. But if you don't stop the war, the soldiers will rebel because they have no equipment to fight with.
So you're confident that Vladimir Putin can agree with Trump's proposal on a ceasefire only if he loses the ground in Ukraine?
I think it would be a last resort thing. It would probably be something that would happen in 2027. They're essentially going to run out of vehicles in, I guess, the next year or so. Now, they'll never really run out because they can still manufacture vehicles at about a rate of 50 a month, tanks and BMPs and so on. But their supply of cheap tanks from the Cold War is essentially gone. I think they have 2,000 or so vehicles left. And I don't know how many vehicles I don't know how long they can make that last. But if Covert Cabal, which is it's an organization on YouTube that literally counts tanks, if Covert Cabal is right, they have about 2,000 some vehicles left, and that'll probably last the next year.
So it seems like Vladimir Putin faces critical dilemma, because if he stops the war against Ukraine, according to your opinion, he will be deposed, dethroned, and he will be decapitated, his government, he will be deposed, and he could face a physical threat to his life, he could be eliminated. On the other hand, if he does not stop the war against Ukraine, economical issues will even be stronger for Russia, and the critical problems which are faced by Russia now will be even bigger, and Russia will not be able to sustain such critical issues.
You're absolutely correct. And one thing I have to give you credit for is that you use the word dilemma correctly. A dilemma is where you have to choose between two equally bad outcomes. And the one difference is that if President Putin continues the war, there may be some sort of saving grace. Something might happen that will prevent eventually Russia is going to collapse. It could collapse soon or it could collapse later.
So you believe that Russia
right now,
definitely will collapse sometime in the future?
Yes. Yeah, I have almost no doubt that Russia will collapse at some point. If they stop the war, they'll collapse almost immediately. If they continue the war, I think there's actually less of a chance of collapse because something might come up to the point where they're able to either make a breakthrough or something goes in their favor. It could be something as simple as Western Europe decides they've had enough of this. They want cheap Russian gas again. We're not going to support Ukraine anymore or send them shells. There is a non-zero chance that could happen. There is a non-zero chance that Russia could do an information war push to convince people that we're going to use nuclear weapons on the West if this doesn't stop. That might actually work. And then all of a sudden they are able to take ground because people stop supplying Ukraine with weapons. So if you want to get technical, it is better to, at least for Russia, it is better to continue the war in the hopes that other avenues might pay off for completing the annexation of Ukraine, although that could take years.
Also, from your perspective, it seems like Vladimir Putin also faces a dilemma about his physical life, physical threat, because if he continues the war against Ukraine, he could also face some critical issues, critical threats to his life, because he continues the war against Ukraine. And recently, Ukraine has eliminated Russian general Igor Kirillov inside the Kremlin, inside Moscow, in Moscow. On the other hand, if he stops the war against Ukraine, he also could be eliminated, deposed from his
You're absolutely correct.
from Kremlin. Does it mean that in any kind of case, Vladimir Putin has a good chance to be physically eliminated in any kind of scenario in the future?
I think that chance grows every day because look, you have generals who every general might think they can do a better job. And all you need is that one general who goes, you know what, I should be in charge. And I have the will of my troops behind me. My troops are loyal to me, not the Kremlin. Maybe I can do this. Now, I don't know whether that means the war would actually stop. The war might certainly continue because maybe some general thinks, hey, I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna prosecute this war the right way. Look, President Putin's what, 70 some years old? 72, is it? I think so, 72. I mean, look, when you're 72, you got more years in back of you than you do in front of you, right? So he's going to be taken out, one way or the other, either by God or by man. That day is coming. And, what he doesn't want is to be taken out before that legacy of his is cemented.
Does it mean that Vladimir Putin has signed a death warrant for himself, after the day after he launched this illegal invasion of Ukraine?
I think that's an accurate assessment. He might have thought that, look, this is going to be a 3-day operation, in and out. It's just going to be like Crimea. But that might have started the long road to hell, once he decided to commence the operation.
Also, I'd like to cover with you another interesting topic about recent Trump's statement on Panama Canal and Greenland. Trump said that it would serve U.S. national interest to regain control over Panama Canal and gain control over Greenland. And my first question will be about the Panama Canal deal. Do you feel that this Panama Canal deal is really bad one, That's why Trump wants to reconsider the main points of this treaty with the government of Panama.
Well, of course, it was a bad deal, right? Like it's something that the United States built. It's something that benefits Panama, and there is a strategic importance to the Panama Canal, an extreme strategic importance to it. Now, well, it would make sense for the United States to gain control over that, preferably by economic means or by negotiation. I think President Carter, who gave the Panama Canal essentially back to Panama, I think that he had good intentions, but at the time we weren't concerned about China as a world power. And essentially, if the United States controls the Panama Canal, it makes it a lot harder for Chinese ships to move into the Atlantic. It makes it extremely difficult for them to do so. So the Panama Canal is of extreme strategic importance.
And what are the chances of another military operation, invasion of Panama Canal by the US military?
That would be difficult to do, not from a technical standpoint, but in order to do something like that, Congress would have to get on board. And it's very difficult to get congressmen to agree on anything, much less invading another country. It was difficult for them to get on board with invading Iraq. In some cases, it was difficult to get them. Well, Afghanistan was a little bit easier. Iraq was a little bit harder. And the only way we would be able to do something like that is with permission from Congress, because Congress holds the funding. The president can't really send troops anywhere for longer than a certain amount of time before Congress has to allocate money for those troops to stay where they are. Now, Panama doesn't have a military, so from a technical standpoint, it would be a very easy fight to actually get troops down to Panama, invade Panama, and take over the Panama Canal. It wouldn't be that difficult to do. But getting the funding to do that, whether it is the morally correct decision, that's a different story. And in all honesty, why fight when you can buy? And if there's enough people who are interested in selling and the United States has money, I don't see why the United States can't buy the Panama Canal back from Panama or come to some sort of licensing or leasing agreement for a certain amount of years. Oftentimes when you hold out a dollar bill, that's a lot more attractive than holding out a rifle.
And why does Donald Trump want Greenland from your perspective? Because there are US troops in Greenland, they are deployed, and there is one military base in Greenland. So why does Trump want Greenland if US military is already there?
So Greenland is probably one of the most important places in the world, or will be one of the most important places in the next century. Whether you believe in climate change or not, the ocean, the ice caps in the North Pole, they're receding. And what's going to happen is there's now going to be a northern passage to Europe. So Chinese ships that want to go to Europe, they would be able to go past the Bering Strait. They would be able to go through what was ice in the Bering Sea and the Arctic, and travel to Europe the long way, not the long way, but without going through the Panama Canal. So there's that. There's the fact that anybody who controls Greenland essentially will control the water route that will be popping up in the next couple of years in the Arctic. The second thing is that Greenland is in the perfect place to put a missile defense system. So if you can put a missile defense system in Greenland, you are essentially protecting everybody from Russian nuclear strikes. We already have a radar system in Greenland, but by putting missiles there, it's a great way of creating a shield, an umbrella, to shoot down missiles in the boost phase before they get to America. So Greenland is of extreme strategic importance. And I think that's why you kind of hear all this stuff about Greenland. Yes, we do have a military base, but I believe the president thinks that it's very important to maintain control over the entire country, or at least some sort of hegemony over the entire country, mainly because it is of the utmost strategic importance for America.
Does this mean that Trump's plans, Trump's willingness to take control over Greenland and also Panama Canal, don't you think that these plans are really bad news for Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, especially taking control over Greenland?
Taking control over Greenland would not be good. Russia wants the Arctic to be their lake. China is trying to get a foothold in the Arctic as well, because they see its importance for delivering goods. Getting a permanent American presence or even buying Greenland and turning it into an American territory, that would be kind of a game changer for Russia, because there's this massive land barrier there that they would have to fly over. Their missiles would have to fly over before they hit the United States. So it really prevents their deterrence, their missile deterrence. And actually, now that I think of it, it doesn't just prevent ICBMs, land-based missiles. It also prevents submarines from getting close to the United States. And that's because a lot of Russian submarines are in what are called bastions in the Kara Sea. And these bastions, essentially very few Russian submarines ever leave the Kara Sea. Instead, their nuclear missile submarines just kind of sit in the Kara Sea for, I think, 30 days at a time as their second strike capability. But if you're in the Kara Sea, what do you have to, and you shoot your missiles toward America, what do you have to fly over to get to the U.S.? You got to fly over Greenland, right? So that would actually negate their missile submarines as well. So you get 2 for 1 purchasing Greenland.
And my last and quick question for you, and if you can deliver a quick answer, it would be great. Would you personally support Donald Trump and the United States gaining control over Greenland and also, for example, Panama Canal?
It's a very good question. From a strategic standpoint, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to purchase these things. Invasion, that's going a little too far. You're essentially going to invade another member of NATO. That doesn't make any sense. And people talk about invasion, but people talk about things they don't understand all the time. Purchasing probably wouldn't be a bad idea. There is precedent for this. We purchased Alaska from Russia. I want to say it was in 1826, I believe. I might be getting that wrong. But there is a history of the United States purchasing land. And if the people of Greenland agree to it, why not?
Thank you, Ryan, for your